Good afternoon.
Hello, everyone. This is the first real episode of Class Dismissed, which we're really excited about. And we're starting To Kill a Mockingbird. To kick it off, we are going to do a short introduction of the book and biography of Harper Lee. So, thanks to biography.com, I have an entire list of stuff that I've got. You will see a lot of parallels between Scout's life in To Kill a Mockingbird and Harper Lee's life as a child. Harper Lee was born on April 28th, 1926 in Monroeville, Alabama. Now, To Kill a Mockingbird takes place in Macomb, Alabama, so there's that parallel already.
I've actually lived in Alabama.
You lived everywhere.
Not everywhere. I'm an Army
32
brat.
different countries.
I've been to 32 different countries. I've only lived in 4.
Back to Harper Lee. She was the youngest of 4 children. Her father was a lawyer, which also parallels with Scout. She was also considered a tomboy, which again parallels with Scout. Her childhood friend was Truman Capote. Capote?
Who knows?
We're guessing on how to say it. You all may know him better as Truman Persons. He wrote In Cold Blood, which is based off an actual murder that happened in Kansas. So that's her young life, now into pretty much our age, in the 20s. She first attended Huntingdon, D-O-N, College in Montgomery. Then she transferred to the University of Alabama at Tuscaloosa. And she wrote for a school newspaper, and it also had a humor magazine. So in her junior year, she was accepted to University of Alabama's law school. She wanted to follow in her father's footsteps and become a lawyer. In that summer, she transferred to Oxford as an exchange student, but coming back that following fall, she dropped out because she really wanted to pursue her love of writing. She wanted to become a writer, and that happened in 1948. And during that time, she worked as a ticket agent.
Cool.
At airlines. And in 1956, she had a couple friends, Broadway composer and lyricist, let's see if you know who it is, Michael Martin Brown.
Yeah.
And his wife, Joy. They paid for her for a year. Everything, they supported her for a full year so she could quit her job and focus on writing. And they also got her in touch with an agent. From 1959 to 1960, she helped her childhood friend, Truman Persons, with research and interviews because he was writing an article for the New Yorker about the impact of the murder of 4 members of the Cutler family in Kansas, which we just referred to. It became the book In Cold Blood. Lee and Capote had the chance to interview the suspected killers before their arraignment in 1960.
Wow.
They witnessed the murder trial in March, but they were invited back to witness executions in 1965, but they declined to go.
Huh.
Well, she declined to go. I'm not sure about Persons. She continued helping him with his novel In Cold Blood, which was mentioned earlier, from 1960 to 1966. But when the book was published, this is sad, a rift developed between the friends. He dedicated the book to Lee and his lover, but failed to acknowledge her contributions.
Oh, that's sad.
So it's like he dedicated it to her, but it's not, and she helped me a lot. He just left it, which was, that wasn't nice. But despite that, they really did remain friends the rest of his life. He died early, if I'm reading that right. Then she returned to New York, and she worked on To Kill a Mockingbird, which will heretofore be known as TKM, because to write it out...
And to say it.
And To Kill a Mockingbird isn't that bad to say.
No, but to write it.
But to write it out, so this will be labeled like To Kill a Mockingbird, but then everything else will be TKM. So she worked on TKM, and he worked on, Capote worked on his article. This article took him, it's the only book he published, and it just went wild because it was historical nonfiction, but it was written kind of like when 9/11 happened. They wrote the report like a real book, and it just sold like crazy. Kind of the same idea. So, and then from 70s to 80s to now, she actually is still alive. She retired largely from public life. She just went, I don't want to say she's a recluse. She didn't leave, but she just doesn't really want to talk about much of the book and what anything like that. She goes to a church in New York, and she's actively involved in that.
Yeah.
So that is the short biography of Harper Lee. And now to begin talking about the book.
Yay!
So this is the relevant time period. If you know anything about it, it really takes place in the Great Depression.
Basically, the stock market crashed and the banks crashed, and people who had money in the banks and had money in the stock market all of a sudden didn't have any money, period. Because basically what happened is the banks invested in the stock market, and so all the money that people had saved was in the stock market. So when the stock market crashed, the banks crashed, and there was none of the savings were there. So no one had any money whatsoever. And it was also a time when the crops were failing.
Dust Bowl.
The Dust Bowl. There was a very severe series of weather going across the country at the time, and so something that would have been very profitable at the time, like crops, it wasn't. So it was a very difficult time. No one had any money.
No one had anything.
No one had anything.
The relevant time period is really between 1933 and 1936, which in the book it says that the second summer takes place in 1935. So that's where we get that. And just to give you some idea of what was happening in there, really the Great Depression, so there were a lot of financial difficulties throughout the world, throughout everywhere, but especially in Maycomb, which Scout doesn't really realize that. But there's a scene where she turns to Atticus and says, "Atticus, are we poor?" And he pretty much goes, "Yeah, we're poor. You know, we're not as poor as most people, but we're still poor because..."
Well, no one had
money.
Poor.
Everyone was poor.
So the Scottsboro trials were in March of 1931, so kind of a relevant time period. A freight train stopped in Paint Rock, which is a tiny community in northern Alabama. 9 young African-American men who had been riding the rails, you know, back in the Great Depression, like people just hopped on the train and stole a ride basically on a lot of the freight trains. They were hobos. Literally. The literal term of hobo. Anyway, these guys were arrested, but as 2 white women, one who was underage, descended from the freight cars, they accused the men of raping them while they were on the train. Within a month, the first man was found guilty and sentenced to death. Then followed a series of sensational trials condemning the other men solely on the testimony of the older woman. A known prostitute who was attempting to avoid prosecution. The Mann Act prohibited taking minors across state lines. So she was trying to avoid all that just by accusing the African American men for raping. Although none of the accused were executed, a number remained on death row for many years. The case was not settled until 1976 with the pardon of the last Scottsboro defendants. So basically this there will be, I mean, when you talk about this in school, a lot of people will point to the Scottsboro trials. So that's what the Scottsboro trials are, and it does parallel a lot of the racial trials in the book. So
just to say a little bit more about Alabama, we're talking deep south. So when we're talking Maycomb, which is, I'm guessing it's a parallel for like Monroeville.
I guess they're there.
I'm guessing they're deep south no matter what.
It was deep south.
No. So, to put it in time context, slavery has been abolished. The Emancipation Proclamation had outlawed slavery, so the civil rights hadn't started. Civil rights was really the 50s and the 60s.
So yeah, this is when there were segregated bathrooms. There were a lot of really bad attitudes toward the African American population.
And just to let you know, I would rate this book, it's probably PG-ish. There's some swearing. You hear worse words at school, I promise you. But I'm not gonna say it. I'm not gonna say it now in case it offends anyone. But when we're reading, we're gonna say it. They use the N-word. It's more of a common term, like a slang term, like we say, "Hey, what's up?" instead of "Hi, how are you doing today?" Kind of the same idea. It's slang, but it was still commonly used.
And it was socially acceptable then.
Just to give a short genre overview, it is considered Southern Gothic. I don't exactly know why, but it is considered Southern Gothic.
Southern Gothic is what I think of when I think of like Savannah or someplace like.
Yeah, so I mean
very
that's
old, very gorgeous.
Yeah.
Louisiana too.
And it's also considered a coming of age story, which the proper definition of this is Bildungsroman. It is the education, development, and maturing of a young protagonist, which is the exact definition of Scout. There is a ton of drama in it. You have the social aspects with the drama between the characters of the book. You have the courtroom drama, which isn't
I always thought it was scary. Yeah, I have to go on and figure out what happens.
And I mean, it's not Law and Order. It's not like that. But there is a realism there because Harper Lee's father was a lawyer, so she probably
knows. She almost went to law school.
So she knows the process of law. And it's also Southern drama because you have the drama with the blacks versus whites. All right, so these are the main themes. It's really, again, a coming-of-age story, which is why you're going to be reading it. It's also living through the Great Depression. There's racial and prejudice injustice. It also touches upon class. Courage and bravery is really Scout's understanding, and Jim as he grows up. Gender roles is huge with Scout because she is a tomboy, and her aunt comes and starts living with her to try to get her to be more of a lady. So there's a huge gender thing there.
I mean, that was the time period that women were expected to be women and
men were expected to be men. So it also talks about unwritten laws of, that's more the norms and
the social customs that we can't really define but happen, you know?
Yeah. And then it also touches on good and evil. So,
what was hard for me in reading this book in high school was seeing that people that I wanted to trust in and believe make the wrong decision. Like in the courtroom, all those jurors were supposed to be justice. We're supposed to be giving justice. They were supposed to be the good guys, and they weren't. They were the bad guys. So, I mean, it's a hard tale to read, to realize that not everyone is good.
Basic overview of the book. It was published in July 1960. It won the Pulitzer Prize. These are the titles that Harper Lee was working with. Ghost Set a Watchman, which I don't entirely get, but I guess in the drafting of it, it just kind of worked itself out. Then it was labeled just Atticus, which would have been...
It's nice, but it's not completely about Atticus.
No, that's the thing. And finally, To Kill a Mockingbird. We are all about making movies out of books. Harry Potter, Twilight, Lord of the Rings.
The Hobbit coming up.
We have Shakespeare. We have
Twist, Jane Eyre's.
Jane Eyre, Pride and Prejudice. You have Emma. You have modern tales of Shakespeare. You have spin-offs like 10 Things I Hate About You. She's the Man. She's the Man is 12th Night. And 10 Things I Hate About You is The Taming of the Shrew. But you have a ton of twists. Well, the book was released in 1960. The movie was released in 1962. We're talking about a 2-year gap. That's it. So, I mean,
that's how incredible a book it would have been.
Yeah, that's how incredible it was. People bought it. It flew off the shelves.
Wow.
So that's how poignant it was.
I mean, now it's like, oh my gosh, it's another boring little high school book. But back then, it was so relevant. It was so interesting.
Because it was
what everyone had gone through. Basically.
It was released because it was released in 1960.
During the middle of the civil rights movement.
Exactly. Yeah. It came out in the middle of the civil rights, the beginning of the middle of the civil rights movement. So and then when the movie was released, it earned 8 Academy Award nominations and won 4.
Wow.
So that's pretty.
That's half of them. That's still a good.
Yes.
What were the Academy Awards?
I don't know. I didn't write it down.
Oh, well,
sorry.
Go look it up on IMDb.
Go look it up on IMDb. We'll try to post a link in the description box.
Yeah. So this is just a short summary of the book. Jean Louise, a scout, Finch lives in Macomb, Alabama, with her brother and widowed father. The story starts the summer before she starts first grade and recounts her adventures with her brother and summertime friend Dill. As Scout grows, her understanding of the world and even her hometown and her own father changes as different events unfold. The most important event being the trial of a black man accused of raping a white young woman. And the book spans about 3 years from the time Scout is 6 to 9 years old, And in that time, we see the events and trial through her eyes with a bluntness that is endearing.
That is the introduction of To Kill a Mockingbird. Hope to see you soon.
Yeah.
All right, class dismissed.